Uh, so thanks for joining us. I want to start with just a quick poll so we have a better understanding of who's in our audience. So if you could take a minute and just complete that, I would appreciate it. While you're doing that, I'll just go over a couple of logistics. So this is a Zoom meeting room, so feel free. You will be able to unmute yourself if you want to ask your questions verbally later. You can have your video on while you do that or off. You can also leverage the chat area if you have any questions you want to share as we go, or if you want to try to get your questions answered kind of in the moment of the conversation, or feel free to share your thoughts on matters as you go as well. I forgot to hit launch on the poll. Now you can do the poll. So thanks for joining us. If you would be so kind to complete that poll, I would appreciate it. I do ask, because it is a Zoom room and you can unmute yourself and we're recording, please stay muted unless you do plan to join the conversation. So thank you. All right, I might leave that poll up for just 1 minute while we maybe start to do introductions of our panelists today. So thanks for joining us. I'm going to ask Kate to introduce herself first. Tell us a little bit about your program at ASU and kind of the context. So as we go into conversation, people can understand your perspective.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Kate Giovacchini. I'm the managing director of the Trusted Learner Network, which is the thing I will be talking about today. I've been with Arizona State University for 8 years, in addition to being a double alumnus from ASU and also a second generation double alumnus. So a lot of ASU, a lot of Maroon blood. So I work on the Trusted Learner Network. This is a digital credentials sort of repository initiative that ASU has been imagining since 2018 with the focus on credit mobility. We recognize that we have significant challenges and our students have significant challenges working with digital credentials, moving them around. Many of our students are transfer students. And in addition, also recognizing that blockchain technologies provided a brand new way to think about these problems and a new way to center the learner at the middle and give them agency over their credentials. So in addition to that, ASU is also engaged in many microcredential pilot and prototype efforts around skills, around badges. We have a lot of very eager educators and learners that are interested in exploring this space. So very happy to be with you and excited to be talking a little bit more about our strategy for the Trusted Learner Network.
Great, thanks, Kate. Darren, do you want to give us a little information?
Sure, thank you. Hi, I'm Darren Hobbs. I'm the Vice President of Academic Records, Credentials, and Career here at Western Governors University. I oversee our Office of the Registrar, Office of Admissions and Transfer Administration, as well as Career and Professional Development. I'm the former registrar here at Western Governors, and so a lot of my thinking in this space has been informed in my role as the registrar, and specifically how much I wanted to get out of the business of producing transcripts. So much like what Kate said, what WGU is doing is we're in the process of taking what we call our achievement architecture, where we represent learner achievements that are skills denominated. So basically, when they satisfy our competencies, all of which now have been enriched with rich skills descriptors, we're able to surface those in terms of a digital credential or an achievement that would be surfaced within a wallet on a blockchain to give learners the control and agency over their credentials, understand their credentials, and also to learn to speak the language of employers, which is the language of skills. We're also focusing on contextualizing their achievements so that they understand how those achievements plug into the labor market. And then because we're able to align credentials to the labor market, we can surface pathways to opportunity or jobs. And then we're also looking at how we can create a transfer marketplace so that learners also understand how their credentials can fit into other credentials from other institutions. The guiding principle here is that a learner-owned wallet should be able to reflect a learner's achievements over their life, regardless of where they come from and how they obtained their skills.
Great, thanks. And Doris, do you want to give us some context?
Good morning. I'm Doris Savron. I'm the Vice Provost for University of Phoenix, and my teams and I are responsible for all of our program credentialing strategies, so certificates, single courses, degree programs from associates all the way up through doctorate. And so I've been with university for 21 years. I started as a faculty member at a new campus and then kind of worked through student services, and then fell in love with the academic space from the teaching end and just said, I wanted to have an influence from a larger perspective and helping students really be able to share the story of what they've learned and how that is relevant to the jobs they're looking for and how that differentiates them. So our biggest focus right now is we've uncovered just from students that they're learning a lot of relevant skills in the coursework, but they're having a hard time articulating those to employers and how to build that in their profiles. And so we've focused on how do we continue to tag the skills and what they're learning and make that very visible both inside the classroom as well as through digital badges, which is a pilot that we've started to run now. And then working really with our careers teams to then enable other products like a dashboard that students can track once they start with us to see these are the skills you'll learn in the program. This is what you've already achieved. These are the ones that you still have to go. And these are the kinds of projects and work you're going to have to do to demonstrate it. And then they're able to then share that out eventually to a resume or to an employer's profile, depending on who they're using to display that work. We've also uncovered that we've got to do the work on this comprehensive learner record to be able to pull what they're already coming in with, because a lot of our students already come in with a ton of skills from their life experiences and other learning experiences. So how do we also demonstrate that to them? So then we're able to show where do they want to go? Here are the skills they're coming in with. Here are the gaps, and these are the solutions that we have to help you plug those gaps, and then really help them enhance that conversation with employers. So.
Great. So thanks everyone for joining us today. As you can see, we've got 3 very different perspectives from 3 different institutions. So hopefully we have a good variety of information for you. So before we jump into the conversation, I'll just share the results so you can kind of see who's in our audience today. It looks like we've got a mix of academic, continuing education, and IT, and a bunch of others. So if you want to share what context you're coming to us from, that would be great in the chat. And we've got a mix of micro-credentialing, comprehensive learners, both programs, kind of in attendance, and then all across the board on where people are in implementing their programs. Most are kind of in that early in-process planning investigation stage. So thanks for joining us today. I think you'll be in good company hearing from these great presenters. So to get started, I would just like to ask Doris, can you tell me a little bit more about how you went about identifying where you were going to focus your efforts? You know, you're newer in your badging program, so how did you decide where to even start?
So we've done a lot of focus groups with our students and employers. We have advisory councils in each of our college spaces to really inform what are the struggles that they're having in finding the right candidates and the right skills. And so between those 2, we kind of determined that we've got to start with students being able to articulate what they're learning. And then we decided based on the feedback from some of our advisory councils and the work we'd already done in some of our programs to start with 2 tests, one in a nursing program and one in our Masters of Business program. We decided nursing because badging isn't something that's common nomenclature in nursing. There's more of the formal credentials that get letters after your name. And so we decided we'll test that to see if there's if it resonates or if we're going to have to call this something different to be able to have them articulate their skills. But we actually went back even further and said, before we can do any of the badging at scale, we have to make sure the programs are tagged and set up in a way that those are very visible, that the authentic assessments are tied really neatly to it, and that all feeds through tech into a pool to be able to identify who did or didn't earn a badge, because we were not interested in manually being able to track these. So we went all the way back to our program blueprints and made it even cleaner to show where the skills are coming from, because we have to crosswalk against programmatic accreditors, regional accreditors, different professional associations we're tied to, along with boards of nursing, state requirement. Like there's lots of people telling us what should be in a program. And then we also wanted to see what the employers were telling us. So that information came from advisory councils and MZ and some other data that's out there for job postings that we pulled in and said, okay, tied to these job titles and codes, these are the skills across all these requirements. Let's build that into our program blueprint and crosswalk that against everything that somebody should learn in a program. And then we went down to the course level and showed that crosswalk against all the taxonomies that are out there on what they should learn. And then we tagged that inside the learning management system to be able to identify that. And then that feeds now to multiple places. So we've actually, through that tagging, have been able to enable careers teams to do what they want to do to display that, enable a dashboard for students, be able to feed that data to our Credly, our badging partner. So that way we're able, and then run data to see where are students achieving and where are they not achieving, to be able to make quick curriculum enhancements. So it's pretty intricate to start. Like it was pretty important for us to start at the foundational element and then talk to our tech partners to be able to make sure we were building it in a way that it was usable to everybody else. And through those discovery conversations, we've learned there's a lot more to do to also make that part of a student profile to further enable the transferability if they choose to bring other things in or take things out with them. So that's work that still has to be done.
Great. And I think that feeds really well into some of the work that ASU is doing. Kate, you want to talk a little bit about why you started on kind of that credit mobility and transfer?
Yeah, so at ASU and with the Trusted Learner Network, and I'll make the distinction that ASU is the sort of progenitor of the Trusted Learner Network, but when we imagine, the reason that we're calling it is the TLN is that we do strongly feel that what we would like to build and design can be a utility for multiple institutions. I mean, when we come to credit mobility and to transfer, any institution that stands alone loses, right? Because we are this essential effort is transferred between different institutions. So setting that up. So yeah, credit mobility is really crucial for us, and that sort of came from the beginning. And I'll think about this as we have sort of our transfer needs around our credit bearing coursework, and then we have all of our micro-credential stuff. I think Darren and Doris and all of us agree that we all imagine and desire a future when all of these items combine to create a comprehensive, flexible, descriptive expression of a learner's lifelong learning. So that's absolutely where we want to go. We've tackled it from this credit mobility perspective, and that's been pretty true to all of the prototypes we started with. This was initially a technology sparked effort. We saw the work that was happening in blockchain around supply chain, and we said, wow, this looks very familiar. And also because of the blockchain giving us the potential opportunity to really push credentials out into the hands of learners, and for learners to be able to take those credentials and sort of wield them as they wish, send them to whoever they'd like to send without the need to sort of return back to the home institution. Credit mobility was really crucial to us from the beginning. So we've done use cases around dual enrollment for high school students that are taking courses at the university. We've done a lot of work around reverse transfer. So the action of a community college student coming to the four-year institution, earning credit at the four-year institution to a place where they have actually earned an associate's degree from the community college. We know that students that earn associate's degrees are more likely to complete for their bachelor's degree. So we're really thinking about how do we help our students succeed, especially in a world where we know that there's something like 36 million learners out there as of 2019 that have some college and no degree. Kelly is nodding because this is like the number that is stuck in my brain. I'm a humanities kid, so math and like numbers are not my key piece, but I spent a lot of time at ASU also working in our online school, and those learners are the folks that are they're some college, no degree. The vast majority of them have transfer credits. They tend to be working adults. They have family. They have jobs. How do we make these folks how do we reduce this friction to help folks get back in and to complete their bachelor's degrees. So we really care about credit mobility, and that was a huge driver for the TLN. In addition to the fact that we are aware of some very clear facts, right, that are coming down the pipeline, which is folks are going to be living longer, they're going to be working longer, and the need to reskill throughout a working lifetime is more apparent than ever. I see Doris nodding because we all feel it. I mean, I know for me, I got my master's, was very privileged to get my master's degree about 7 or 8 years ago. And I'm thinking, oh man, in a couple of years, I'm going to have to figure out what the next thing is so I can stay on top of it. So the TLN is very informed by this desire to, how can we create a utility that can benefit as many institutions and as many learners as possible? And how do we sort of stretch this across our entire industry so we are communicating better with each other through these data standards and in a way that can kind of unlock this extra agency for learners so they can figure out what makes those credentials valuable for them. Yeah.
That was great. And I think, Darren, your project or your work kind of spans both of those. So if you want to tell us a little bit about how you decided to make your focus on that, kind of that opportunity for learners.
So, well, it started with the fact that, again, like I said earlier, I just wanted to get out of the business of producing transcripts. I didn't see a lot of value there. And the degree being the credential that learners leave with increasingly is being perceived by the consumers of our credentials, employers, as being a poor signal of what someone can actually do. I had the opportunity to sit in on a student focus group where I just listened in and we were talking to them, and this was probably 4 years ago. What if we were able to, as you completed your courses here at Western Governors, what if we were able to show you how those competencies that you've now demonstrated mastery of through competency-based assessments related to things like a job, how much you could earn in that job and this, that, and the other, would that be helpful? The students were like, well, yeah, that would be amazing because, you know, I complete these courses and then I got the next course and the next course and the degrees, you know, a few years out, but I would like to understand how what I'm doing relates to maybe a job I'm looking for today. One of the participants, very insightful gentleman, said, you know, what I do is I take your courses of study and I grab your competency statements and I use that language when I write my cover letter or when I brush up my resume as I'm applying for a specific contract. And since I've started doing that, my success rate of getting contracts has gone up measurably. The other students and myself in the background were like, why didn't I think about that? That's when I had this moment of, you know what, learners really need to understand how their learning fits in context to something that is beneficial to them. I'm also a humanities person, and I'm a big fan of learning for the sake of learning. But at the end of the day, you still got to put food on the table and pay your bills. So that's kind of what started all of this thinking. Then we were given the opportunity in 2019 to participate after the first interoperable learner record published by the American Workforce Policy Advisory Board. We got to participate with the 3 major pilots that were conducted and ended in 2020, where the second white paper was published on learning and employment records. That really congealed a lot of our thinking around the direction we needed to go. Simultaneously, we had started working with a coalition around this notion of a rich skills descriptor, which is taking basically market signal skills categories, but contextualizing them within the needs of a job role. So we launched the Open Skills Network, which has now grown to over 1,000 members with some marquee participants to help us to understand how, when you talk about a specific skill for a job role, what do you really mean? Then we capture that into a schema called an RSD schema that can now be published to the open web. And then libraries can get created around these skills. And ultimately, we're releasing a tool that will allow anyone to create rich skills descriptors or repurpose what already exists out there in another library. Why? We want people tagging their curricular offerings to skills. We want employers tagging their jobs descriptions to skills in a way that is operational and machine understandable and readable. Because as our vision exploded, we realized, you know what, this LER thing, that's where we want to go. So we, again, worked in coalition with IBM, National Student Clearinghouse, Concentric Sky, IQ4, Skillful Indiana, Ivy Tech, and Goodwill to basically create the Indiana Achievement Wallet, which launched in October. And the idea is that we're guided with some principles, open infrastructure, because we recognize that, you know, there's other LER solutions at play. The Trusted Learner Network is one. Velocity Network is another. North Dakota's got theirs. The military's got Millgears. It's solid developed. So we're like, you know what? These things all have to connect. Otherwise, we're not serving learners the way we need to serve them. So open infrastructure guided our thinking on this, as well as a commitment to using open data standards. So in the Indiana Achievement Wallet, we're leveraging the Open Badges data standard to express credentials of labor market value. We plan to next start leveraging the comprehensive learner record because we recognize that achievements also need to be contextualized in an academic way for that portability of credit. We are using or will be using the PESC XML standard to be able to drop a transcript into the learner wallet. Plus, IBM's already designed the technology to receive other types of non-academic credentials, proof of vaccination, health records, proof of identity, background checks. The list goes on and on. So great, but why? Because learners need to have transparency around their credentials. What does it mean? Every time I finish a course, every time I finish a competency, what does this mean in context? Meaning, how can I use this new currency of skills? How can I spend it to my advantage? So we create that transparency using these open data standards. Oh, and including Credential Engine's CTDL, especially where schools they're not in the open badges game. They're not using CLR. We need to meet them where they're at. So a lot of schools are defining their credentials in Credential Engine's repository. Well, we can now link that back and pull it into the wallet as well. Then we take all of that information, we align it to the marketplace, and then we're able to return to the student, what direction do you want to go? In the Indiana Achievement Wallet, you'll see medical assisting. Okay, here's how your skills profile matches up to the profile needed for medical assistance. Here's your gaps. Here's where you can go to shore up those gaps and earn other credentials. Here's employers that are looking for this job role right now. And here you can click this and now it takes you to that website so you can apply for the job. We also want learners to be able to curate a unique records package so that they can assert their unique skills and talent brand tailored to the specific job that they're interested in. This is important because it goes back to what that gentleman was saying in the focus group. And then we also want employers to be able to search for individuals based upon, you know, whatever search criteria they want to use. Are they looking for specific skills, specific credentials, a specific institution of higher ed? They can search for that and then get a candidacy pool back and show how and see actually how those candidates match up to their job role definition. And then engage with those learners to discover their identity, because on the blockchain, their identity is protected and private. That's what is guiding our thinking and using the open data standards in the specific use case that makes the most sense. Also, that learners can understand how their learning fits into the context of where they want to go next.
Yeah, and Darren, I think you mentioned a number of organizations and partners and stakeholders. So beyond the learner, what are, are there specific stakeholders that you've had conversations with to hear feedback and what their thoughts are on the work you're doing, or kind of help shape what you have created and kind of the roadmap?
Yeah, we've engaged with employers to basically help us validate the theory around using the technology to find candidates. We've anticipated that we don't want employers to have to go and use a tool that we provide. We want to integrate with their ATS, their HR management systems. So we're working on the API integration points for that purpose so that they can just tap into the tech. And as we connect with the other blockchains, then of course your pool of candidates becomes exponential, if you will, as more and more schools, talent developers, whether that's unions, whether the military, of course, by connecting into the solid blockchain. Even employer-based trainings can be credentialized and represent and assert these skills. And all of these things can combine in almost like an alchemy to create a very powerful skills profile for learners. The last thing I'll say is that in addition to working with our employers, we're working with Skillful Indiana because we recognize that this technology needs to serve everyone. And there are many learners out there that face near insurmountable hurdles to accessing education, accessing jobs. It could be transportation needs, food and housing insecurity, even a discomfort using tech or even a device to access the tech. So we've also envisioned a community of care wraparound service where we can bring that human element in, consisting of job coaches, career counselors, academic advisors, even social services that learners need to avail themselves of in order to remove these hurdles to gain access to this powerful ecosystem of pathways to opportunity. And then, of course, we're getting feedback from various technology groups, other academic institutions, et cetera.
Yeah. Great. Doris, you were nodding your head while Darren was speaking, especially around kind of that employer and learner focus. So who are your stakeholders as you're kind of early, you're earlier in your plan than Darren. So what are you hearing from them?
So employers are definitely critical component of this and really understanding their needs, their challenges, and really staying on top of what we're seeing in industry trends to be able to make sure we're up to speed with the most current trends that we're seeing. And then the other piece is we spent quite a bit of time with our tech partners, both inside the organization and outside, because the infrastructure to build this stuff has to be built in a way that uses common standards and can scale quickly. And so how do you tag all that? How does that feed the learner record? How does LMS feed the all of that component of it? And there's been quite a bit of work to do to kind of get that to an understandable place, because I think everyone has the idea of what they want to do, but until you start doing it and looking at it holistically and taking the steps, you learn a lot, quite a bit on the how to set that up for scalability. And then I would say our students are critical as well. Like where are they coming from? What are their challenges? How do you close that gap? And for us, that's why we started there first, because if you can really create that awareness while we're building all those other pieces, it's one step further for students to really, because they have to decide every course whether they're going to stay in it or not, and to help them stay motivated and see how it's relevant and what that does for their capabilities and how that aligns to what's happening in the market. We do that through the dashboard is really critical too, because they've got life challenges, as was mentioned by Darren. I mean, they're dealing with a lot, and everybody's dealing with a lot the last couple of years, especially, but they're dealing with a lot. They're trying to take care of their families. They're dealing with work circumstances that are pretty chaotic, intense. And so how do you help take away a lot of that noise that Kate has mentioned, to be able to allow them to focus and be able to remind them of what that's going to do for them and how they're making progress against that, so that they can, achieve their goals for their family.
Great. And Kate, what about you? Who are some of the other stakeholders outside of maybe learners and employers that we've heard from already?
Yeah, I'm just reflecting on the responses from my fabulous co-presenters here, and there's about 6 weeks from Sunday that you can try to tackle this problem. And I think that we're doing a good job of representing that spread. So I will go after so employers are definitely very important to us, because this is all like a big cycle, right? And employers is definitely a stopple on that cycle. And of course, students, 100%. I think Darren was sort of alluding to, and Doris got there around, how can we design something that increases equity instead of decreases equity? I mean, I think that's the dangerous game that we play whenever we're trying to especially get into a new paradigm around technology. That's really what this is. So for the TLN, we have a sibling initiative inside of our institution called Pocket that represents the learner wallet and portfolio tool that ASU is working on. And they are extremely student focused, which has freed the TLN up to think more about what are the B2B relationships that need to happen institutionally to employers, to alternative credentialing institutions. So when we think about our stakeholders, we have our fabulous internal stakeholders, which is our registrar and our provost office. We look to those folks to help guide towards what is most crucial at this moment as we try to build this stable of ideas, right? But I think what's really important to the TLN, what makes me excited about the TLN, is we consider our TLN community our stakeholders, and that TLN community is open. In 2020, right before everything completely changed for all of us forever, we brought together 120 people for our TLN unconference, and that was the space that we used to really define, what is the scope of what we're talking about here? So when TLN is thinking about stakeholders, we're thinking about the community, because to Darren's point, multiple networks are going to appear and dozens of solutions are going to pop up. This is going to be a very interesting space as everybody comes with their own opinions, with their own pieces of focus and with their own insights. Wow, this piece should really work like this. We want the TLN to be a place where practitioners throughout the digital credential space can come together. And we want the TLN as a utility to be able to serve as many of those fabulous ideas and networks as possible. So in a way, you all are our stakeholders, just in the same way that we're beholden to our registrars to build really trustworthy, trusted governance relationships, in the same way that our technologists are stakeholders. So Kelly just dropped a link in, and folks can visit us at trust.asu.edu. We are actively looking for governance partners right now. So if you are interested, if you want to add your voice to the pool to help us shape what some of this baseline governance looks like, I really strongly encourage you to come to trust.asu.edu and become one of these stakeholders that we can be accountable to make sure that the TLN is delivering on the trust piece.
Great. And there was a question in the chat about if the software that Darren was mentioning with the applicant tracking was available, and he did say that it was not there yet. It's in the pilot and verify, pilot stage, but eventually it will be moved into that open format. Did I summarize good, Darren? Let me know if I missed something.
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure to verbalize that in case anyone's watching the recording. So that kind of helps segue, what are some of the crucial processes or systems? You've mentioned some of them, I think, in our conversation, but as others are looking to either start or scale their programs, what have been some of the kind of key pieces to put in place? Maybe Kate, do you want to start?
Yeah, actually, and conveniently, this question takes us directly to what IMS Global's role is here, because I think we will all heartily nod and agree that we need data standards like the CLR and like the Open Badge, both of which are in the capable hands of IMS Global to shepherd. Those data standards are absolutely crucial for this to work. for a credential that might repose on the Trusted Learner Network to end up in Darren's Indiana Achievement Wallet so that a learner can get a job if they took courses at, Cal State. We have to have that interoperable data standard in order for those records to be able to traverse and be useful for learners. And if we fail to do that, we are going to be in a really difficult place with our students. So for TLN, that is a cornerstone of what our strategy is. But on top of that, we also want to recognize that all the ways that we exchange credentials right now are based on trust relationships. So our institutions trust one another. Employers trust those institutions to issue accurate representative credentials. We also strongly feel that it's this governance piece that also needs to scale. Because how do we end up doing this in a new world when we're asking registrars, HR folks, individual hiring people from all different types of businesses? How do we do this in a world where they have to reinterpret what authenticity means, what provenance means, what it means that, is this really from WGU? Well, we really need to build in those governance structures so we create a really trusted system. So there's just no question, and we reduce that friction and the credentials just work.
Wonderful. Darren, do you want to kind of build on what Kate started to talk about?
Well, Kate said everything so well. I don't know that I can improve upon it. The only thing that I would add is that yes to everything Kate said, yes to the need for open data standards, and as Kate was talking about, the trustability of these credentials, the verifiability of these credentials, ultimately where I see this going is then the automation that can be built in. That once that trust relationship is firmly established, a registrar need not worry about this again, that I can build business logic to automatically accept and apply the credit from University of Phoenix, ASU, into our programs, and I would hope vice versa. And this, of course, goes beyond our institution. Once I understand how military MOS relates to my competencies and my skills, I can automatically accept those in and apply credit, thus freeing up the talent that I employ who's scrutinizing this information. That's, oftentimes you're looking at course descriptions, and you're lucky if you can dig into a course syllabus to understand how you can award credit. Now I can take those talented individuals and deploy them into higher value, more meaningful type work, including auditing the robot to make sure that everything's working the way that it should work. So that's the only thing I can add is that just think, we're talking about scalability, think about the possibilities of the automation to make this turnkey and allow us then to focus on the next evolution.
Yeah. And Doris, I think you hit on something that's crucial, is that identifying of those skills and having the systems in place. I don't know if you want to expand on that, because sometimes that's a question I get from institutions. Well, what's a micro-credential in problem solving really mean? Some of that metadata that can live there is helpful, but I don't know if you want to expand.
Yeah, so there are a lot of descriptors out there that are kind of standards for that, but we're also, I'm going to add this as a layer to this. Regulatory partners are critical. I mean, from my position where I sit, like, we have to do a lot of education on how this all wraps together, because to them, they see it and then they're like, well, what is that? Like, how does that fit over here? And so that's why for us, the crosswalking of the taxonomies and really showing that layer in the program blueprint so that they see their stuff is really there, even though we're using more industry friendly language around skills, which is, you want employers to understand that, you want students to understand that, but unfortunately there's other language that's used with regulators sometimes, and so you have to help them see it. So we've done a lot of work to crosswalk that, and we actually are building a tool that kind of marries all that into a system to be able to automate it then, and then be able to people can then use that to be able to see, if I come in and say, this is the skill I have, here's how it crosswalks against ONET, MZ, IBM, all of those other taxonomies that are out there, but also incorporating the other standards that are out there. So for us is then thinking about, okay, how do you then make sure in the learning management system, it gets picked up? Like you're building courses that are also being built by faculty who are also having to, there's a lot of players that have to align to that standard. So building a template that can feed into that. And then you know that that particular assessment is tagged and tied to this descriptor that then can feed other places. It's pretty complicated. And so we had to start with the vision of from end to end with a student and employer involvement, what is it that each group needs? And then what do we do today? And where do those things have to then get tagged in the systems? I mean, even as simple as like we have products and vendors who are using APIs, but when you start to scale and what you have to do to have sophisticated calls for those, like that, when you start to do the volume that some of us do, ASU, WGU, and our courses, like you have to start to think about that pieces of it too, or the delay of updates is really slow and it creates entanglements with other tools that are also trying to touch that same microservice. And so it just gets, it's important to start with the blueprint so we know what we're building and why we're building it and who the voices are, and then working with our tech and regulators to be able to sure that it shows up in a way and that it also meets the standards of our regulator teams, which are all in different pages depending on what state you work with and which areas we work with. So I would say that's a critical stakeholder as well. And then the vendor partners is just creating awareness and sharing vision too. Like we all kind of get tagged with like, here's a tool, I think it'll be good in your classes. We really want to work with you, but then having the vision of what is your vision for the product and then what is our vision for what it needs to do, and kind of marrying those two things is important in conversation. So we even changed how we do some of those conversations so that they're aware of where that has to fit in the specs that have to be met in order for that to happen.
Yeah, and I think those are all crucial pieces that I think some people see these rows, like, oh, we can start a micro-credentials program and it's just going to be all sunshine and roses until you start to grow and scale and find those automation opportunities. And accreditors are huge. I know ACRO, the registrar's organization, has a work group right now looking at micro-credentials and alternative credentials to figure out where do they need to fit? What kind of advice do they need to have? Because at some point, maybe even our accreditation organizations will start to look at these fields. So I think it's important to have that in your mind as you're rolling these programs out. There was lots of conversation about skills frameworks and things like that. So I just want to mention IMS just wrapped up phase 2 of our Wellspring work, which is focused on that skills framework for education to employment. So I put a link to our resources that are just recently published, kind of summarizing our work and also expanding on that. Included in that list of resources is some primary research we've done with employers. So for some of those institutions that are interested in hearing, what do employers really think about this work? There's some great research there too. While we're wrapping up, please share any questions or comments you have as attendees. If you want to unmute and ask your question, just raise your hand and then we can make sure you're not talking over anyone, or feel free to use that chat to share those thoughts too, because this is really meant to be a conversation, not just amongst us. And we know that some of the other institutions maybe aren't as large or as structured in the same way as these 3 institutions, but I think even 3 institutions like this have very different challenges and opportunities. So thanks. All right. So Doris just mentioned what you just decide to badge is critical. Yeah, so how do you, what you're going to actually badge is important, and that's a conversation institutions need to have. Some have made the statement that if it's already on the transcript, they don't want to do a micro-credential because they don't want to duplicate efforts. Others have said, no, we're going to badge it so it's in a different way for learners to be able to display it. So the data behind it is what's crucial. But
yeah, we heard quite a bit from employers that there's so much. I mean, anytime there's a trend, there's excitement and everybody wants to tap into that. But if there's not a lot of thought behind like what you're actually assessing and how they're earning it, it dilutes it for employers, and then it makes it harder to sift through, and then it makes it, they don't want to deal with it then, because I don't want to, this is just like somebody putting it on their resume. And so we were really thoughtful about that too. It's like, what's a milestone celebration, not badge worthy, but celebration worthy, and we can do that internally, versus what is micro-credential worthy to be able, and then what's the data behind it to show why and how they earned it, to make it valuable for an employer to be able to see that. Because we've got an approach in the organization, can we do a badge for this? Can we do a badge for this? We're like, time out, like we really have to, and that's where our own internal governance around what we decide to badge was critical in starting to set that up, because everybody wants in on it, but not everything should be badged in that way. So
I want to plus 10 what you just said, Doris, because we, in achievement architecture, which is a project at Western Governors that consists of my organization and our skills architects and our workforce intelligence and credential integrity group, we get approached by the colleges. We want to badge this, we want to create this micro credential, and I get to be the one to say no. And you know, in fairness, I'm gleeful every time I say no, because, and here's where here's our vision of leveraging the different data standards. I can make an assertion about an achievement using CLR with all of its attendant metadata and skills in order to contextualize and align to workforce needs. That wrapped in a VC can still be sent to an employer as a trusted assertion. I'm using the open badges standard to create credentials, and we have further basically declared to our colleges credentials of labor market value, that if there's not a clear line of sight where you can show that the market is asking for this cluster of skills, then don't bother credentializing it. Because, you know, can you credential comp 1 with an open badge? Of course you can. But why? But can you credential comp 1, comp 2, and public speaking as a language and communication credential because you have market data that says this is sought as a power skill? Of course you can. So I would argue that that's the thought you need to put into when you badge versus when you don't, because there is the CLR standard, thanks to IMS Global, that will still allow you to make valuable assertions about achievements and learning without wrapping it in a pretty little image that you can now preserve and circumscribe as my credential of labor market value, or my credential of however you define value for your learners.
Yeah, and I would just say there's some institutions that still want to be able to recognize some of those other learning or activities on their campuses that maybe aren't labor market credential, but they're doing it in a student success or retention or engagement kind of way. So some of them have decided to do different types of badges or different types of credentials. So I've seen some called like souvenirs versus a micro credential. So just making sure that as an institution, you identify what are your expectations, because as you identify and make it more clear, that helps everyone outside your organization. So whether that's the next institution they attend or the employer, that helps give them some context.
I think, Richard, so Darren, what you're saying, and Doris, is it's plus one in a really big way, that these skills should be valuable. I think that we are maybe going to create a space where there's going to be just a ton of badges. Badges are going to be left, right, and center. You're going to be swatting them away before everything sort of settles down and we get there. But I think Richard West's question is interesting, and one that so Richard's question is, are badges only useful if an employer wants it? Is there no value to badging and communicating interest, roles, participation, community engagement? These are really interesting questions. At our institution, ASU is quite large and represents a lot of different interests. We have our research wing, we have all of our colleges. So I think that these are some of the questions that folks are exploring right now, and probably why we still see so much churn and may continue to see everybody's mixing it up to try to figure it out. Richard, I think for the TLN, when we initially started envisioning this, we envisioned the traditional credit bearing course, we envisioned the degree, But one of the example use cases we used was, what if I am a jazz pianist and I have a teacher? Like, shouldn't the TLN be able to have my jazz pianist teacher assert that I have a proficiency in jazz piano? That may not be valuable for my employer, but it is certainly representative of my comprehensive learning record and of who I am. And so we kind of have to ask, how much of this, how do we strike that balance, right? Between strictly making this about how do we get jobs, and how do we create something that allows people to feel like they can express the whole breadth of their learning of all different kinds. I see Hakeem. Yeah.
Right. And if I may maybe add to it, I think it goes back to, what do we think the role of education is? Because there's been arguments about this for a long time. And one role of education is market-based. It helps people get jobs. But that's not the only role for education. One of the roles of education is self-actualization. It's enculturating people into a democracy. It's all these other kinds of things. And so I would worry if open credentials only did one of the purposes of education, not the other purposes of education as well. And I agree, though, that we need to have a way to maybe communicate this to employers so they know which credentials we're saying are attached to skills that they care about. I get that. But I hope we don't limit ourselves to also exploring how open credentials can do these other important purposes of education as well.
So, Richard, I think that's a really good point. And the approach that we've been taking is we anticipate the need for learners to make self-attestations about their learning, their experiences, attach portfolio evidence to support such an attestation. We also there is a part of our university that is very much interested in awarding badges through a gamified experience of learning, behavioral awards, all of these things. And so we're developing a vocabulary around what they mean. And where I personally am drawing a line is that if you want to recognize a learner, if a learner wants to be recognized for non-academic things, that's outside of my bailiwick, and great, go do it. I'm not putting it into the LER. I'm not surfacing it in the wallet, but I'm going to give the user, the learner, the holder, the ability so to do based upon their value of such a badge, because it's not, that's the whole intent of a learner owned wallet, and giving them the ability to develop their own brand. It's not for me to say, you can't have that in your wallet. Where I draw the line is what I, as the institution, will put into the wallet on behalf of the learner versus what they can put in the wallet because they see value to it. I'm all for that.
And I would say there's some other institutions who have a different perspective where they've really gone and focused on badging or microcredentialing the learning outside of the classroom, because they feel like the classroom learning shows up on the transcript. So don't feel like we're telling you the only reason to do it is what Darren believes. That's one perspective, and very rightful. Employer, they need to have relevance beyond the initial activity, because if you issue too many credentials, I'm sure all of you have earned a badge for registering and, in theory, attending a conference, right? Are those badges very beneficial? Maybe, but there's not a lot of rigor compared to some of the other micro-credentials that some of these institutions are offering. So that's where the metadata behind the badge is so important, to allow that evidence to really show what that badge means. But we have lots of questions here in the chat. I just want to make sure we're not missing. So have any of you had the conversation for those people who want to badge an activity to help drive enrollment or engagement in that activity? So I see Doris. Yeah.
Yeah, if you want me to answer, like we've gotten approached quite a bit through marketing and enrollment teams on how to drive that. Now, I would say driving it by creating awareness, I think, about what we can do to acquire skills. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think they were trying to also use it in ways that was more surface level, like give a badge for this, or they get a badge for completing this step of the process. And so what we chose to do is, there's a micro-credential and then there's a milestone celebration. And we kind of designate those as two different things. And eventually the student can share both of them that they want, but they look and feel different so that they're differentiated when they start to put them on social media and some other places, because we continuously hear from employers that they're having a hard time making sense of one or the other because there's so much out there and they're just trying to get their arms wrapped around it. The other piece is there's already some level of distrust that people are already coming out of college from the theoretical standpoint versus the application. So that we're trying to use really the credentials to show the application of the learning, even though we know that the holistic part of the learning life cycle is incredibly important for a lot of the reasons of what Richard had mentioned, but we also build internal communities to help do some of that as well. So we just chose to take that approach because of helping our employers really get their arms around how to know that somebody's ready because of the feedback and the research we've seen that they're just doubtful that some of the things that they're learning are applicable because they're not sure how they're actually being evaluated on their ability to apply theory.
Yeah, I did put a link in the chat. Our September roundtable focused on co-curricular. So that's a different perspective on recognizing those achievements. So I put that in there because that recording is available for you too. There was a good question here at the end. How are you educating learners about how to use these badges or micro-credentials? What do they display? How do they display it? Do you have any good recommendations?
I can start. I don't know if anyone else
Okay.
wants me to. So we've done, so we're doing a couple of things. So we're helping our teams, the counselors and advisors actually do some of that work through their conversation, both in the enrollment process, as well as once they're enrolled. But we're also embedding video content into the classrooms to be able to describe, to be able to tell, hey, this is what this means. This is how it's tied to your goals. Here's the value of this. And we also are doing user sessions with our pilot groups to say, tell us what this means to you, explain to us how you would use this. And we're learning from that where there's gaps of knowledge versus where they connect the dots to be able to then create additional tools and resources for them.
Darren or Kate, any other recommendations or?
We'll be leveraging our career and professional development group primarily to do all of the communication, education around how learners can use their credentials to maximize their benefit, but we're going to go beyond that group and again, as Doris said, enrollment counselors, our program faculty, et cetera, as well as printed collateral and framing video devices to help learners understand how this new type of record can be used by them for their benefit and to their benefit.
I think there's a lot of fabulous work that's going to happen in this space. And I think we're at the spear tip of this. I think about my Apple Wallet and I think about loading my boarding passes on there. Has anybody done that in this room? You load the boarding passes and then the next time you get one, you say, oh my God, I have 20 old boarding passes from Southwest Airlines. So, I mean, and there's just a huge amount of depth that we're going to experience around. I think achievement types is what we've been dancing around a lot. That's a piece in the data standard for the CLR that contains absolutely multitudes in how we're going to self-organize as an industry here. So I think there's going to be a lot of lessons learned. I think we're also circling around this. Well, what does it mean when I get a great, you came to this workshop badge? There's going to be a lot of really interesting work with learners on how we organize this stuff. And I know we're excited to do that with Pocket, and we're excited to continue to learn from everybody else because we all need to take each other's advice here and move this forward as an industry in order to make it valuable for learners.
Yeah, I think we could continue these conversations many times. I think we leveraged a lot of conversation, and I think we had some good information to share. We're at the bottom of our hour, so thank you for joining us today. I did just put a link in because if this kind of topic is exciting to you, I just wanted to mention IMS has a full conference on digital credentials. So that is scheduled for February 28th through March 3rd, and early bird registration ends on Wednesday. We're hoping to be back in person, or our plan is to be back in person in Atlanta. We do have a virtual option for those of you who can't attend in person and you're still interested. So thank you very much to my panelists for sharing their information and their conversation today. Thank you to the attendees who joined the conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us today. We will have our next roundtable in January. I'll follow up with a link for more information as we get that finalized. So thank you very much. Everyone have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Yep.